a fire crackled in the heart of Catania, Sicily. The air was thick with smoke and tension. A crowd had gathered, some curious, others in silent mourning, as a 25-year-old woman was dragged toward the flames. Her name was Agatha. But Agatha wasn't just any woman. Her body was broken. Just days before, her breasts had been ripped from her chest with red-hot pincers. Her wounds still bled through the soiled cloth wrapped around her, and yet she didn't cry, didn't beg, didn't break. Instead, she walked as if her spirit had already left her body and risen higher than the empire that tried to crush her. So how does a woman, young, unarmed, and utterly alone, become a threat to the most powerful empire in the world? How does she turn torture into a legacy and death into defiance? To answer that, we have to go back, way back, to the 3rd century. Sicily in those days wasn't the sunny tourist destination we know today. It was a dangerous time. One rumor, one wrong glance at the wrong god, and you could disappear forever. Agatha was born around 225 AD in Catania, a town wedged between volcanoes and imperial orders. Her family was wealthy, educated, and secretly Christian. That alone made their lives fragile. But Agatha? She didn't just follow her family's faith. She lived it like she was born for something more. Even as a child, people noticed how serious she was about her beliefs, not in a performative, attention-seeking way. Quiet, steady. By the time she was 15, she made a vow that turned her entire life upside down. She pledged her virginity to Christ. That was a radical act in her world. In a society where girls were married off as bargaining chips, Agatha said, no, not to suitors, not to tradition, but to the entire system that told her she had no ownership over her own body. And here's the part that really set the stage. Agatha was stunning. Chroniclers wrote about her like she was carved out of light. Golden hair, ocean blue eyes, and a face that seemed to glow with something unearthly. Combine that beauty with her family's money, and she quickly became the most sought-after young woman in town. But Agatha didn't want marriage. She didn't want power, wealth, or comfort. She wanted one thing: to stay true to her vow. And for a while, she managed to hold the world off telling her family. She was too young, not ready, needing time. Her parents, knowing her heart, protected her. But the clock was ticking. Then came Quintianus. In the year 250, Rome sent this man to govern Sicily. Think of him as a corrupt political appointee with too much power and no conscience. Quintianus was known for two things: his hatred of Christians and his predatory obsession with young women. So when he arrived in Catania and saw Agatha at a public festival, it wasn't just infatuation. It was conquest. To him, Agatha was the ultimate trophy. A rich, beautiful, untouched Christian girl who had the audacity to say no. That no made her dangerous. That no became a challenge. At first he tried to win her over the typical Roman way: extravagant gifts, elaborate feasts, influence with her family. But Agatha, she shut him down. Over and over, she told him plainly, her life belonged to God. Her soul wasn't for sale. And marrying a man who persecuted Christians? Absolutely not. That rejection. It didn't humiliate Quintianus, it enraged him. This wasn't just about desire anymore. It became about domination. If he couldn't have her, no one could. So he started digging. He had spies comb through her family's past, looking for evidence of Christian worship. And he didn't have to look far. In January of 251, he got the excuse he needed. A new imperial decree forced every citizen to make sacrifices to Roman gods or face death. Quintianus saw his chance. He arrested Agatha's parents first. When she came to plead for their release, he had her seized too. Inside the Praetorian palace, he gave her an offer: marry him, renounce Christianity, and her family would be spared. Simple terms. But Agatha's response was even simpler. I would rather die a Christian than live as a pagan and the wife of a tyrant. That's the kind of clarity that shakes people, even her enemies. But Quintianus, he wasn't moved. He was humiliated, furious, and now fully obsessed. He threw her into prison. But before the physical torture began, he tried a different tactic: moral corruption. He handed her over to a woman named Aphrodisia, the madam of Catana's most notorious brothel. Her mission was to break Agatha's will using temptation instead of pain. Aphrodisia wasn't just any brothel owner. She was cunning, influential, and knew exactly how to destroy reputations. She'd broken girls far older and tougher than Agatha, turned them into objects for Rome's elite. To her, this was just another job. For an entire month, Agatha lived in that brothel, not as a worker, but as prey. Aphrodisia threw everything at her: expensive clothes, sweet perfumes, seductive men, food laced with drugs. She threatened her, mocked her, tried to make her feel small, dirty, broken. But Agatha never once gave in. She prayed through it all, refused the food, ignored the flattery, rejected every temptation. And after 30 days of trying, Aphrodisia gave up. She told Quintianus, "She can't be corrupted, not by anything I've got." That's when Quintianus lost all pretense. He dragged Agatha back to the palace and stood her before a rigged tribunal. There was no defense, no lawyer, no justice, just the appearance of legality. He gave her one final offer: sacrifice to the Roman gods, marry him, live. Agatha didn't flinch. "My body belongs to Christ, my soul belongs to God. I would rather die in martyrdom than live in dishonor beside a man like you." Those weren't just brave words, they were dangerous. He needed to make her an example. So, the torture began. First, they stripped her and tied her to a rack, arms and legs pulled so tight her joints nearly popped. Then came the red-hot irons, pressed into her back, nails driven under her fingernails, whips weighted with lead that tore her skin apart. And through it all, she didn't beg, didn't cry for mercy. She only prayed. "Christ gives me strength. Christ protects me." That kind of strength, it scares tyrants. But Quintianus wasn't done. What he did next crossed every line, even for Roman brutality. He ordered her breasts to be torn off with burning hot pincers. This wasn't just violence. It was personal, a mutilation aimed directly at her womanhood, her vow, her body's symbolism of resistance. It was a calculated act of hatred disguised as punishment. And it was slow, deliberate. Agatha screamed, but not the way they expected. In between cries of pain, she spoke. "Cruel tyrant," she gasped, "are you not ashamed to mutilate in a woman what you yourself sucked from your mother? But my soul has intact breasts, with which I nourish all my sacred feelings." Imagine that, a woman, mangled and bleeding, turning her torture into theology, into poetry, into power. Even the guards were shaken. Some turned away. Others wept. Quintianus? He realized he had failed. He hadn't destroyed her. He'd created a martyr. So, he tossed her into a dark, filthy cell, expecting her to bleed out and die in agony. But then something happened, something no one expected. That night, guards reported strange noises from her cell, light coming from nowhere. When they opened the door in the morning, they froze. Agatha was healed. The wounds on her chest were gone. Her skin had closed. Her face was glowing, peaceful, and she was kneeling in prayer. Word spread fast. Some said St. Peter himself had appeared in the night and healed her. Others whispered it was black magic. But whether miracle or myth, everyone felt it. Even the soldiers began to doubt their orders. Was she really just a girl, or something more? Quintianus panicked. His power rested on fear, and now fear was turning on him. He had one card left: fire. If the Christian gods had healed her, then he'd make sure there was nothing left to heal. No body, no shrine, just ash. On February 5, 251, Agatha was dragged into the center of Catana. A bed of burning coals had been laid out in the public square, an open furnace meant to slowly cook her alive. The crowd watched in stunned silence. Some were angry, others prayed. Then, just as her body touched the fire, the ground shook. An earthquake, violent, sudden. Buildings cracked. Quintianus's own palace split down the middle. People screamed, some fled, others dropped to their knees. To the pagans, it was a sign of divine wrath. To the Christians, it was proof of God's hand. But it was too late. Agatha didn't burn alive. The smoke overwhelmed her, and she died from asphyxiation. Her final words were whispered to those brave enough to approach through the smoke. Lord, just as you gave me grace to endure his tortures, give me grace now to come home to you. That was how Agatha died. Not screaming, not begging, but praying. And her death? It wasn't the end, it was the beginning. Agatha's death sent shockwaves far beyond the stone streets of Catana. What Quintianus hoped would silence the Christians had the opposite effect. Her name spread like fire, first whispered in secret gatherings, then carved into the hearts of believers across Sicily, and eventually throughout the Roman Empire. She wasn't just mourned, she was immortalized. Christians didn't see her as a victim, they saw her as a warrior. A woman who stared down Rome's brutality and never blinked. A woman whose mutilation became a symbol, not of defeat, but of divine defiance. And Quintianus? He didn't last much longer. A few months after Agatha's death, his own soldiers turned on him in a military revolt. He was killed in disgrace. No one mourned him. No statues were raised. No stories were told, except one, that divine justice had found the man who tried to break a saint. But Agatha's story didn't fade with her persecutor. Instead, it grew louder. Her remains were secretly gathered by Christians and preserved as relics. Her story was copied by hand, retold by word of mouth, woven into hymns and sermons. She became the patroness of Catana, yes, but more than that. She became a beacon for women everywhere who suffered in silence, who were told to obey, to endure, to submit. And her miracles didn't stop. In 425 AD, nearly 2 centuries after her death, Mount Etna erupted violently, lava racing toward Catana like the fury of the gods. In desperation, the people carried Agatha's veil, said to be part of the cloth that once covered her wounds, up the slope of the volcano. And then, the lava stopped, right at the edge of the city. From that moment on, she wasn't just a martyr, she became the protector, not only of Catana, but of all who faced catastrophe, persecution, and pain. Her feast day, February 5th, became one of the most sacred dates in the Christian calendar. Churches across Europe were named after her. In paintings, mosaics, and sculptures, she's often depicted holding her severed breasts on a silver platter, not as horror, but as holy defiance. It's hard to overstate how radical that image was, and still is. In a world that still often treats women's bodies as battlegrounds, St. Agatha's story stands as a reminder that dignity doesn't come from power, but from purpose. That the most powerful form of resistance isn't violence, it's refusal. Refusal to be silenced, refusal to be owned, refusal to surrender what is sacred, be it faith, or body, or soul. And here's the thing, Agatha didn't set out to become a legend. She wasn't trying to be a hero. She didn't fight with swords or led armies. She simply said no, and refused to back down, no matter what they did to her. That quiet courage is what made her unstoppable. It's what still makes her story relevant, nearly 1,800 years later. Because even now, in our so-called modern world, we're still fighting the same battles against abuse of power, against systems that try to silence the vulnerable, against the belief that some lives matter less. Agatha's story reminds us that true power doesn't come from cruelty or conquest. It comes from conviction. Her resistance wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was faithful, steady, fierce in its stillness. And in a time where everything seems designed to break us, to make us forget who we are, what we stand for, Agatha's life dares us to remember that saying no can be the most courageous thing a person can do. So the next time you feel outnumbered, overlooked, outmatched by a system too big to fight, think of Agatha. Think of the girl who said no to a tyrant and paid the ultimate price. Think of the saint who turned torture into testimony. And remember, they burned her body, but they couldn't touch her spirit. That's the kind of fire no empire can extinguish.